Welcome. I'm David Brooker, and you're listening to the Old Soul podcast, exploring spirituality and life. For the past 45 years, I've been actively engaged in Christian ministry, working at what is often described as the progressive end of the theological spectrum. Energized and intrigued by the wonder of creation, by the diversity of humanity, by the mysteries of life, and by a pervading sense of connection with that which is beyond me. Something that stirs my soul, something bigger than me. In my retirement, I remain committed to rigorous theological and biblical scholarship, open to new ideas and enthusiastic about dialogue with those who live at different points on the Christian theological spectrum, and with those who live within different faith traditions. You'll find that diversity represented within my presentations. I began writing a blog primarily to sustain and kindle my own ongoing thought and practice. But I've been encouraged to share these ramblings from the cobwebs of my mind with a wider audience. And I count it a privilege that you may be interested in reading and or listening to my material. I look forward to your feedback. I hope you might even choose to subscribe to my site at www.oldsoul.blog. Thank you for checking it out. Now let's get into this week's episode. It's time to talk politics. Specifically, to talk about the intersection of politics and faith, and what politicians might be able to learn from the tenets of faith. Our theme? Words, words, words. Here in Australia, we're still up to 12 months out from a federal election, but politicians are definitely in quasi-campaign mode, and the jostling for media profile and policy prominence is on in earnest. The leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton, made his attempt to grab the limelight with a dramatic policy announcement about the development of nuclear energy. And the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, countered with a press conference from a big new solar energy farm in Queensland. Without doubt, energy policy will be a major election focus over the months ahead. But the rhetoric is also building around cost of living, housing, health, immigration, education, vaping, climate, and more. Words, 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 and more words. The airwaves, newspapers, TV, and online platforms are overflowing with words as major parties make a grab for publicity, and the minor parties and independents make their play for relevance. Lots and lots of words. The tragedy of all this is that often using words simply to fill space seems to matter more than substance. The torrent of words might be meaningless or even false, but appearing to have lots to say carries more weight than using less words to say something worthwhile. Nowhere, it seems, is this more true than in the US presidential campaign. Some of the words that I've heard spoken by Donald Trump in this campaign make no sense at all. But his ability to fill the space with words appears to win the day with his MAGA supporters. Words, 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 with or without meaning. Politics is perhaps the quintessential environment where words, words and more words are seen as a substitute for meaningful action. Politicians and others who master the art of speaking with confidence, exuding an air of authority, seem to think they can get away with almost anything. But they play that game at their own peril. The electorate is not stupid, and ultimately, perhaps at the polling booth, perhaps via subscriber numbers, perhaps as invitations to speak dry up, those whose strident words are not matched by genuine action will learn that real authority, genuine credibility, comes not by what they say, but by what they do. Those whose actions do not match their rhetoric will be exposed as hollow, shallow-minded pretenders. St. Francis of Assisi from the early 13th century is reputed to have said, "Preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words." Historians tell us it's unlikely that Francis ever actually said that, although he may have said something like, "It's no use walking anywhere to preach unless our walking is our preaching." But the force of the saying is valid. Words without corresponding action are meaningless, empty, fake even. In the fourth gospel, Jesus was challenged to declare by whose authority he spoke. He replied, "The works that I do testify on my behalf." Jesus points not to his words, not to any teachings or preachings or conversations, but to his actions. Actions speak louder than words, says Jesus. It's not what I say that draws people to me, but what I do, how I act. It's not words, but works. I think it's significant that this story is featured in a gospel that begins with a long treatise about the Logos, the Word. This is the opening sentence of the fourth gospel. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Is this a contradiction? Is there a tension in the fourth gospel between the writer's emphasis on logos, or word, and Jesus' call to action? Not if we understand how the writer uses the concept of logos. If we read a little further in that prologue, we discover that all things came into being through him, the Logos, and without him not one thing came into being. That's John chapter 1 and verse 3. You see, in the fourth gospel, the Logos is the creative impulse of God. The Logos is not passive, but generative and creative. It's not words, but action. It has been said of Christian theology that in Jesus the Word became flesh, and theologians have spent the last 2,000 years trying to turn it back into words, words, words. This presents quite a challenge to those of us who spend our lives fashioning words, proclaiming words, writing words, reading words. Words have a place, of course, but without corresponding action, they are empty, meaningless, wasted. Incidentally, this affirmation is found in the teaching of all the major faith systems. Buddhist monk Sumangalo writes, "Good words alone are not enough. You should also do good deeds, and that's how you come to be respected." Islamic theologian Suhail bin Hassan Qadi comments, "If a person is truly religious, his behaviour and actions will speak volumes about his religiosity. Actions speak louder than words." Way back in 1975, there was another preacher espousing this theory. It was half-time in the 1975 AFL Grand Final between North Melbourne and Hawthorn. The Hawks were behind, and their legendary coach John Kennedy made an inspirational plea to his players.
"At least do something! Do! Don't think, Mick! Don't hope! Do! At least you can come up and say, 'I did this!' Or 'I shivered it!' Or 'I played on!' At least I did something! Do something! Do!"
The great John Kennedy. Unfortunately, it was to no avail. The Hawks lost heavily to the Roos that day. But Kennedy's passionate speech, reminiscent of Jesus' words in the fourth Gospel, has become part of footy folklore. It's actions, not words, that matter most. When you think about it, this is true of our personal experience, isn't it? The people who have been or are most significant in our lives become so less for their words to us and more for their action toward us. What we remember most and value most is not what they said, although some of that wisdom will be important, but what they did, how they cared, how they acted toward us and toward the world around them. It is good for us to be reminded about this from time to time, especially in a noisy world where we are bombarded with words, and more words. How good would it be if we and our politicians could take on board the wisdom of Jesus and of the Quran and of Buddha and of St. Francis and of John Kennedy and worry less about filling the space with words and more about getting on with just action. Words will be necessary, of course, but it will be in the action they drive that words will ultimately derive their value. Perhaps we could pay less attention to the words we say and hear, and more attention to the actions we take and the behaviours we witness in those around us. What do you think? Well, that's it for this podcast. Thanks for sticking it out to the end. I do hope you found it worthwhile. Incidentally, if you prefer to read rather than listen, you can find the text of this podcast, along with a host of other resources, at www.oldsoul.blog. And do subscribe if you would like to be notified of future presentations. This is David Brooker, and I look forward to catching you next time.